In Africa, there is a country rich with approximately 2.8 billion tons of platinum group metals. All the things that makes a country rich and close to self-sufficiency. But this country has been under sanctions since 2002 imposed by the United States of America. The country had lost more than $150 billion because of sanctions imposed by the EU and the US. Because of these sanctions, the country is one of the poorest on the continent with persistent inflation, high dependence on low productivity agriculture. This is a story of how the US, the UK, and the EU used sanctions to destroy a country. Zimbabwe.
Do you think that you will have to continue to fight for your Zimbabwe?
I shall continue to fight. Even my comrades, I can see as I meet them, they are very serious about the problem. They won't stop till we get our Zimbabwe. We won't drop down till we get what we want, because we had much blood on which is already wasted, of which we won't get back.
Why do Africans join the Rhodesian army?
Because there's no jobs here in Rhodesia. There's just jobs for Europeans only. Yeah, no African jobs.
So they join?
Rhodesian army.
They join what? To fight or for the money?
They just fight for money.
Don't they fight for Rhodesia?
No, they're just fighting for money.
Not for
this country.
For better understanding, I partitioned the story into 5 steps.
Step 1.
Before we continue, like, comment, share, and subscribe.
White settlers.
To understand this step, we need to look at a problem: how white people got into Zimbabwe in the first place. But before that, I want you to keep this in the back of your head as you watch this video. Knowing the US, the EU, and the UK is understanding that they never involve themselves into situations that do not massively benefit them in one way or the other. Forget about human rights violations or undemocratic laws in any country. They only care if you have something to offer. Anyways, to understand why Zimbabwe has been under sanctions since 2002, we need to go back in time. In the 1880s, Cecil Rhodes' British South Africa Company went into Zimbabwe obtaining mining rights from tribal leaders like King Lubenkala of the Ndebele people. Cecil Rhodes, on his path of conquering and owning lands of the locals, especially fertile lands for agriculture and lands rich in minerals, wrote to the British government to grant his British South Africa Company rights over the Matabele land and the Mashona land. This promoted the immigration of white settlers into the region, offering them incentives and maintaining a system that favored the white settlers over the black locals, like owning land, fertile lands taken from the locals. Under British colonial rule, Africans could not occupy or buy land freely. In 1930, a Land Appointment Act was passed by the Southern Rhodesia legislature and was accepted by the Imperial British government in 1931. This law made it illegal for black Africans to own land. Approximately 50 million acres of arable land were made available to the white population of just 48,000 settlers, and 1 million Africans had to share 20 million acres. Let's look at the Lancaster House Agreement signed in 1979. It laid a foundation for the Zimbabwean independence from British rule. But in doing so, it also f***ed the Zimbabweans royally by passing laws that will slow down the process of land redistribution to Africans. One of its key clauses related to land reform was that it protected against the compulsory acquisition of land by the state for the first 10 years of independence. This meant that land could only be transferred on a willing buyer, willing seller basis during this period. This limited the government's ability to redistribute land. The agreement aimed to address the sensitive issue of land distribution between the minority white farm owners and the majority black population without resorting to forced transfer. After this period, the government could legally pursue land redistribution more aggressively, which eventually led to the controversial land reforms in 2000. The controversy came from the government's fast-track land reform program, which involved the compulsory acquisition and redistribution of land from white farmers to Zimbabweans without compensation.
The policy was intended to correct historical land imbalances in land ownership,
but it led to international condemnation due to the way it was implemented. The historical imbalance of land ownership were the Land Appointment Act of 1930, which removed African communities from their fertile lands to accommodate newly arrived white settler communities. I doubt if those black communities were compensated. So, in the year 2000, Zimbabwe experienced a significant and intense event as part of its land reform program.
Land was what the War of Independence was all about.
All riches come from the soil. They wanted soil. That was the first question.
And they still want soil.
They still want it.
And they still haven't got it.
They still haven't got it.
Okay.
Since independence.
So if there are all kinds of problems and delays and you don't get that land by August, what do you think people here are going to do?
If it is that, otherwise we can organize, we young generation, and go to those farmers and starting squattering there.
Thousands of war veterans and squatters reportedly, with the support of President Robert Mugabe's government, forcefully occupied white-owned farms across the country. The farm seizures were a response to the slow pace of voluntary land redistribution and were justified by the government as a necessary measure to rectify colonial-era land imbalances. However, these actions receive widespread international criticism by the bullies, the US, the UK, and the EU, because any form of injustice against the whites is a crime against humanity.
Step 2.
Sanctions. Let's look at Zimbabwe's natural resources. Zimbabwe is rich in natural minerals like chrome, gold, coal, lithium, and diamonds. The country has the second largest platinum deposit and high-grade chromium ores in the world, with approximately 2.8 billion tons of PMGs, platinum group metals, and 10 billion tons of chromium ore. The platinum group metals are essential and precious metals which include platinum, palladium, rhodium, iridium, osmium, and ruthenium.
These PGMs are also utilized in several industrial processes, technologies, and commercial applications.
Their unique chemical and physical properties make it an excellent raw material, catalyst, and ingredient for manufacturing processes. Consumer and industrial products made with platinum and other PMGs include flat panel monitors, glass fiber, medical tools, computer hard drives, nylons, and razors, amongst so many others. Platinum group metals play a critical role in the autocatalysis and pollution control in the automotive sector. The bulk of global PMGs is mined in Southern Africa and Russia. What does that tell you? The people putting sanctions on Zimbabwe know they cannot get anything for free from Russia, so they focus on Southern Africa. Zimbabwe said not on my watch and kicked out their oppressors. So they got sanctioned to set an example to all the other African countries, but South Africa especially. If you fuck around, this is what will happen to you. That is the main reason why Zimbabwe was sanctioned. Because the land stolen by white people were taken from them and they were kicked out of the country.
All the other reasons put forth by the West and the United States, like human rights violations and all that stuff, only play like 1% role. 1%.
These people do not care about human rights or democracy. If they did, there are so many other countries, especially in Africa and even the world, that they could intervene in. But no. They knew if Zimbabwe had the balls to kick out white people from the country, it meant that the owning of Zimbabwe's minerals was at risk. So they decided to lock up the country with sanctions, punishing everybody in the country, especially the civilians, especially the everyday people. Because with economic sanctions, everybody suffers financially, but not the people in power, because they still have power, like the power to take whatever they want, which makes corruption even more of a problem in the country. And now, Zimbabwe and its people are fighting a battle on two fronts: sanctions and corruption.
According to the Zimbabwean vice president, the country lost more than $150 billion because of the sanctions imposed by the EU and the US.
Additionally, according to Eddie Cross, an economist, he pointed that Transparency International figures show that corruption has cost Zimbabwe $100 billion since independence.
$100 billion. $100 billion.
That is a lot of money. So, if you put both sanctions and corruption together, you will see that nobody really cares. The US, the UK, and the EU do not care for the everyday Zimbabweans living in poverty, especially the women, the children, the elders, and people with disability. The West and the United States don't care about African people, or should I say, black people. Because since the whites left and they imposed their sanctions on Zimbabwe, the cries of the people don't really concern them.
Step 3. Corruption.
At this stage, the leaders don't care about their people, because there is no way $100 billion can just up and disappear from the country without the people in charge of the money not seeing the direction it went towards. According to an Al Jazeera investigation, Zimbabwe's government was using smuggling gangs to sell gold worth hundreds of millions of dollars, helping to mitigate the effects of sanctions. Of course, in situations where countries are sanctioned carelessly, these sanctions are likely to be evaded. Because the government is under sanctions and the smuggling gangs are not, the government uses the smuggling gangs to smuggle gold out of the country to countries like Dubai to clean the gold, remove all traces of its conflict or criminal source, and then selling it in the international market. That is how it's done. That is how our African minerals are stolen from conflict zones in Africa to the world market. That is how oil, diamonds, gold, tin, cobalt, platinum, and many other minerals leave places like Congo into the world market. That is why these places remain poor and in conflict, just like Zimbabwe is poor and with sanctions. In both situations, the ones that suffer the most are the civilians, the everyday Zimbabweans, the everyday Congolese, the everyday Africans.
Step 4.
Do these sanctions even work? Is sanctioning a country the best way to fight corruption, human rights violations, government policies, and actions that prevent democracy? Before we dive into that, let's look at two kinds of sanctions: comprehensive and targeted sanctions. Comprehensive sanctions refer to the nationwide measures that impact the export or import of all goods and services to a specific country or individuals, normally residents in that country. These sanctions are broad-based and can include trade restrictions, financial limitations, and other economic actions. Targeted or smart sanctions are sanctions focused on specific actors rather than applying broad measures to an entire country. These sanctions aim to influence behavior, deter misconduct, or promote compliance. This sanction may include travel bans, asset freezes, or other targeted restrictions. Looking at the two sanctions, we can already see how sanctions like the comprehensive sanction can be problematic when it comes to fighting corruption, human rights violations, government policy, and actions that prevent democracy, rule of law, and respect for human and property rights. Research has shown that countries that have undergone comprehensive economic sanctions appeared to be more corrupt. And we all know that when the people in power are corrupt, all the other problems that the US and the UK are trying to sanction Zimbabwe for are going to jump in as well. For example, when a country is corrupt, government policies are not respected. Actions that prevent democracy becomes widely practiced. This is what makes the whole sanctions situation shady to me. It almost looks like these sanctions were put on Zimbabwe to combat the Pan-Africanism of late President Robert Mugabe, as the returning of lands to the rightful black owners could have brought about a change on the African continent that could have tampered with the natural resources heist of the West and the US. If their aim were to fight against corruption and human rights violation, then the sanctions could have been more targeted at those responsible for the problems in the country, not the whole country. Because, as it seems, targeted sanctions are very effective against corruption and human rights violations, and they also play a vital role in promoting accountability, deterring misconduct, and safeguarding values.
Step 5. Damned.
Will these sanctions ever be lifted? Of course, the West and the US want these sanctions to end very soon. But first, Zimbabwe must ensure that
a sacrifice is made.
the Zimbabwean Democracy and Economic Recovery Act, ZEDRA, is an act passed by the United States Congress which imposed economic sanctions on Zimbabwe to provide for a transition to democracy and to promote economic recovery. This bill was introduced on March 8, 2001 by Senator Bill Frist and Senator Ross Feingold. The bill, sponsored by Senator Frist, Jez Helms, Hillary Clinton, and Joseph Biden, was passed on August 1st and December 4th by the Senate and House of Representatives respectively. The bill was then signed into law on December 21st by George W. Bush. In the bill, the following were certifications that, once satisfied, would lift the sanctions. 1. The restoration of the rule of law, including the respect for ownership and title to property, freedom of speech, and an end to the lawlessness, violence, and intimidation tolerated by the government of Zimbabwe, the ruling party, and their supporters. 2. Electoral conditions. Zimbabwe must hold a presidential election that is widely accepted as free and fair, and the president-elect is free to assume the duties of the office. 3. Transparent land reform. The government of Zimbabwe must demonstrate a commitment to an equitable, legal, and transparent land reform program. This basically means that previous white settlers who settled on stolen lands will have to reoccupy the lands and would then decide if they want to sell or not. Military and police. The Zimbabwean Armed Forces and the National Police of Zimbabwe and other state security forces should be responsible to and serve the elected civilian government. All the above points I just mentioned from the ZEDRA recovery program can be arranged, but the part where white settlers would have to decide whether to sell the land or not is a hard one. Damned if you do, and damned if you don't. Because either way, the everyday Zimbabwean is fucked. Of course, if all those conditions are met, sanctions will be lifted, the country will return to the world market, the economy will be booming, but at what cost? Because only the white settlers will enjoy all the benefits. Zimbabwe will be just like South Africa, the white people owning all the money makers, including lands, while the blacks remain the laborers and only a few rich blacks with land ownership.
Conclusion.
I think Simbi Mubako, Zimbabwe's former ambassador to the United States, and Cynthia McKinney, a former American politician, said it better. They accused the supporters of the bill of anti-black racism. McKinney referred to the bill as nothing more than a formal declaration of the United States' complicity in a program to maintain white skin privilege under the hypocritical guise of providing a transition to democracy. Thank you for watching. Please leave a comment and let me know what you think about the video. And also like, share, and subscribe. See you in the next one.